One of the biggest financial traps in modern life was sitting right in front of most people every single day, parked in driveways, lined up in apartment complexes, waiting at traffic lights, and filling up crowded highways every morning. Most people believed their biggest expense came from housing, or maybe food, or perhaps those little purchases that financial influencers love to criticize online. They blamed coffee, subscriptions, takeout meals, or occasional shopping sprees. But the reality was far more expensive and far more dangerous to long-term wealth. The true wealth killer for millions of people was transportation, specifically the cost of owning and operating cars. For years, society quietly normalized spending enormous amounts of money on vehicles. People celebrated new cars like trophies. Whenever someone drove up in a shiny SUV, luxury sedan, or sports car, others immediately assumed they were successful. Friends complimented them. Co-workers admired them. Family members congratulated them. Social media amplified the illusion even further, turning vehicles into symbols of status, achievement, and identity. Very few people stopped to calculate what those cars were actually costing them over time. That was the dangerous part. The expense hid in plain sight because everyone participated in it. Monthly payments became normal. Expensive insurance became normal. Rising gas prices became normal. Maintenance bills became normal. Even financing a car for 7 or 8 years somehow became acceptable. People rarely questioned the system because everyone around them was doing the same thing. But when someone finally sat down and examined the numbers carefully, the truth became impossible to ignore. The average person often underestimated the true cost of car ownership by thousands of dollars every single year. Most people only focused on their monthly payment because that was the number dealerships wanted them to think about. A salesperson would ask what monthly payment someone could afford instead of discussing the full cost of the vehicle. That small psychological shift completely changed the way people viewed their purchases. Someone might proudly say they only paid $600 per month for their car, but they ignored the insurance bill, the fuel costs, the registration fees, the maintenance expenses, the interest payments, and the most overlooked cost of all, depreciation. Depreciation quietly destroyed wealth year after year. The moment a brand new car left the dealership lot, it immediately lost value. A vehicle that cost $40,000 could instantly drop by several $1,000s simply because it was no longer considered new. That loss happened in minutes. It was one of the few purchases in life where someone could spend a massive amount of money and become significantly poorer the second the transaction was complete. Yet people continued doing it every day. Many buyers convinced themselves they deserved the upgrade. Maybe they worked hard. Maybe they received a raise. Maybe they wanted to reward themselves after years of sacrifice. And while there was nothing inherently wrong with enjoying nice things, problems began when emotions replaced financial logic. A person earning $50,000 per year might purchase a vehicle that consumed nearly a quarter of their income once all ownership costs were included. Another person making $70,000 could easily end up dedicating over $1,000 every month to transportation alone without fully realizing it. Over time, those decisions created massive financial consequences. Imagine two people starting from the same financial position in their late 20s. Both earned similar salaries. Both had similar opportunities. One person decided to purchase a luxury vehicle with high monthly payments, expensive insurance, premium fuel requirements, and rapid depreciation. The other bought a reliable used car that simply got the job done. At first, the difference barely seemed noticeable. The luxury car owner looked more successful. Friends admired the vehicle. Coworkers assumed they were doing well financially. Meanwhile, the other person drove something simple and practical that attracted almost no attention. But 5 years later, the picture changed completely. The first person had spent tens of thousands of dollars on car payments, insurance, repairs, registration fees, taxes, fuel, and depreciation. The second person invested the money they saved into index funds, business opportunities, retirement accounts, or personal development. One person accumulated liabilities. The other accumulated assets. That difference compounded over time. Most people failed to understand opportunity cost. Every dollar spent on a car was a dollar that could no longer grow elsewhere. If someone spent $10,000 per year operating a vehicle, they were not simply losing $10,000. They were also losing what that money could have become if invested. If that same $10,000 had been invested annually into the stock market with consistent returns, it could eventually grow into hundreds of thousands of dollars over decades. In some cases, it could even become millions depending on time and investment performance. Cars did the exact opposite. Instead of growing in value, most cars lost value every single year. This did not mean all cars were bad purchases. Transportation was necessary for many people. Commuting to work, taking children to school, visiting family, and running daily errands often required reliable transportation. The problem was not ownership itself. The problem was excess. Many people purchased far more vehicle than they actually needed. Someone commuting alone to work every day might buy a massive SUV designed for off-road adventures they would never take. Another person living in a city with heavy traffic might finance an expensive sports car that spent most of its life sitting in gridlock. Others stretched their budgets to buy luxury brands simply to project an image of success. Meanwhile, financial stress quietly built in the background. Monthly bills piled up. Credit card balances increased. Savings accounts remained empty. Retirement contributions were delayed. Emergency funds disappeared. But the car remained parked outside looking impressive. One of the biggest reasons transportation costs became so destructive was because they attacked wealth from multiple angles simultaneously. The first major cost was depreciation. Most vehicles depreciated heavily during the first few years of ownership. A brand new car often lost a significant percentage of its value within the first year alone. By the third or fourth year, much of the steepest depreciation had already occurred. That was why financially savvy buyers often targeted vehicles that were around 3 to 5 years old. At that point, the original owner had already absorbed the biggest financial hit. The car still had modern technology, reasonable reliability, and many years of useful life remaining, but the price was substantially lower. Buying used was one of the simplest ways to reduce transportation costs dramatically. Yet many people avoided used cars because they associated new vehicles with status and success. Marketing campaigns reinforced this constantly. Commercials rarely showed financially disciplined people making practical decisions. Instead, advertisements sold emotion, freedom, power, luxury, prestige, adventure. Manufacturers understood that people rarely bought cars based purely on logic. They bought them based on feelings. Someone feeling insecure about their financial status might purchase a luxury vehicle to compensate. Another person wanting to impress others might overspend to create the appearance of wealth. Social pressure became a powerful influence. Ironically, truly wealthy individuals often behaved very differently. Many millionaires drove practical, reliable vehicles for years. They prioritized investments over appearances. They understood that real wealth was built quietly, not displayed publicly through expensive possessions. The next major cost of vehicle ownership came from financing. Very few people paid cash for cars. Instead, they financed them through loans that stretched across several years. Rising interest rates made these loans increasingly expensive. Someone with excellent credit might still pay significant interest over the life of the loan, while someone with poor credit could end up paying outrageously high rates. Some buyers became trapped in endless cycles of debt. They financed one vehicle, then traded it in before paying it off completely. Negative equity rolled into the next loan. Monthly payments increased. Loan terms became longer. Eventually, some people found themselves owing enormous amounts on vehicles worth far less than the debt attached to them. This cycle quietly destroyed financial flexibility. Instead of directing income toward investments or savings, huge portions of paychecks disappeared into transportation costs every month. Then came insurance. Insurance expenses varied dramatically depending on age, driving history, location, and vehicle type. Luxury cars usually cost more to insure. Sports cars often carried higher premiums. Younger drivers faced expensive rates simply due to statistical risk. Many people accepted whatever insurance renewal they received without comparison shopping. But insurance companies constantly competed for customers, which meant rates could often be reduced simply by asking. Financially disciplined individuals treated insurance like any other recurring expense. Once or twice per year, they reviewed their coverage, requested quotes from competitors, and negotiated better deals. Small savings mattered. Saving $50 per month might not seem life-changing immediately, but over decades those savings added up substantially. The same principle applied to countless areas of personal finance. Wealth was often built through consistent optimization rather than dramatic overnight success. Fuel costs created another hidden drain. People frequently underestimated how much they spent on gasoline because the purchases occurred gradually. Filling up the tank became routine, but over a full year, fuel expenses could reach thousands of dollars. Commuting long distances amplified the problem. Someone driving an hour to work every day not only spent more on gas, but also accelerated wear and tear on the vehicle. More miles meant faster depreciation, more maintenance, and greater repair costs. Time was another hidden expense. Long commutes consumed hours every week that could have been spent exercising, learning new skills, building side businesses, spending time with family, or simply resting. Transportation costs were not purely financial. They also affected quality of life. That was why some people eventually realized paying slightly higher rent closer to work could actually save money overall. At first glance, spending more on housing sounded counterproductive. But when someone reduced commuting distance dramatically, they often saved on fuel, maintenance, repairs, depreciation, parking fees, and time. A shorter commute could also reduce stress levels significantly. Many workers spent years sitting in traffic every morning and evening, arriving home exhausted and frustrated. Over time, that lifestyle affected mental health, relationships, sleep quality, and productivity. Transportation decisions shaped far more than bank accounts. Maintenance and repairs created another layer of expenses. Even reliable cars required ongoing care. Oil changes, tire replacements, brake repairs, battery replacements, fluid changes, and unexpected mechanical problems all added up over time. People who learned basic maintenance skills often saved enormous amounts of money throughout their lives. Simple tasks like changing oil, replacing air filters, swapping windshield wipers, or changing batteries could often be learned through online tutorials. Spending a little time developing those skills reduced dependency on expensive service centers. Of course, not everyone enjoyed working on cars, and some repairs required professional expertise. But understanding even the basics empowered people to make smarter decisions. Knowledge protected consumers from unnecessary expenses. Many repair shops relied on customers lacking technical understanding. Some people paid for services they did not truly need because they felt intimidated or uninformed. Even something as simple as using a diagnostic scanner could help drivers identify problems before rushing to a dealership. Sometimes the issue was minor. A loose gas cap could trigger a warning light that caused unnecessary panic. Without basic knowledge, someone might schedule expensive inspections or avoid driving entirely out of fear. Technology made information more accessible than ever before. Anyone willing to learn could save thousands over a lifetime. But perhaps the most important lesson involved mindset. Society conditioned people to believe expensive cars represented progress. Many individuals upgraded vehicles every few years without considering the financial consequences. They normalized perpetual payments. At some point, monthly car payments became viewed as permanent parts of adulthood instead of temporary obligations. That mentality benefited lenders, dealerships, and manufacturers far more than consumers. Imagine the financial power of eliminating a $700 monthly car payment entirely. That money could fund retirement accounts, could build emergency savings, could pay off debt, could start a business. It could purchase investments that generated income instead of consuming it. Yet many people remained trapped because they prioritized appearances. There was also a psychological component that made expensive vehicles particularly dangerous. Lifestyle inflation. As income increased, spending increased alongside it. Someone earning more money often felt pressure to upgrade every aspect of life simultaneously. A bigger apartment, better clothes, more vacations, more expensive restaurants, and of course a nicer car. But wealth rarely came from spending everything earned. It came from the gap between income and expenses. High earners who controlled expenses often became wealthy quickly. Moderate earners with disciplined financial habits frequently outperformed reckless spenders earning far more. The car sitting in the driveway told very little about someone's actual financial health. A person driving an older, reliable sedan might have significant investments, no debt, and substantial savings. Meanwhile, someone driving a luxury SUV could be drowning in monthly obligations. Appearances were misleading. Social media intensified this illusion because people showcased purchases without revealing the financial consequences behind them. Viewers saw luxury lifestyles but not the loans, stress, or sacrifices supporting them. Comparison became dangerous. People felt pressure to keep up with friends, coworkers, influencers, and neighbors. Instead of building lives aligned with their actual goals, they chased validation. Transportation became one of the most visible symbols of this behavior. The financially disciplined approach looked very different. Rather than asking what monthly payment felt manageable, disciplined individuals asked deeper questions. How much would this vehicle truly cost over 5 years? How much depreciation would occur? What insurance expenses should be expected? How much fuel would commuting require? What maintenance issues were common for this model? Could a reliable used option accomplish the same purpose for far less money? Would buying this car delay financial independence? These questions changed everything. A practical mindset focused on utility instead of ego. Reliable transportation mattered. Status did not. There was also a growing realization that alternative transportation methods could dramatically reduce costs in certain situations. Some people successfully used public transportation, biking, ride-sharing, or remote work arrangements to reduce dependence on vehicles entirely. Others became one-car households instead of maintaining multiple vehicles. Of course, these solutions were not realistic everywhere. Some cities lacked reliable public transportation. Rural areas often required personal vehicles. Families with children had different needs than single individuals living in urban environments. But even small adjustments created meaningful savings. Reducing unnecessary driving, carpooling, combining errands, working remotely when possible, choosing fuel-efficient vehicles, maintaining proper tire pressure, driving smoothly instead of aggressively. All these behaviors reduced long-term transportation costs. The key point was awareness. Most people never calculated the full financial impact of their transportation choices. They saw individual payments but missed the larger picture. Someone spending $1,000 monthly on transportation might not initially realize that equaled $12,000 annually. Over 10 years, that became $120,000. And that figure still excluded lost investment growth. The numbers became staggering when viewed long-term. Financial freedom often depended less on dramatic investment strategies and more on controlling major recurring expenses. Housing and transportation typically represented the two largest categories. Optimizing those areas created enormous leverage. Unfortunately, transportation remained emotionally charged. Cars represented identity for many people. Someone passionate about automobiles might genuinely enjoy driving performance vehicles, attending car events, or modifying cars as a hobby. There was nothing wrong with spending money intentionally on something deeply valued. Problems arose when people spent unconsciously, when purchases stemmed from insecurity, comparison, or social pressure rather than authentic enjoyment. Intentional spending was different from mindless consumption. A financially secure person who truly loved cars and deliberately budgeted for them made a completely different decision than someone stretching finances to impress strangers. The distinction mattered. Personal finance was ultimately personal. Different people valued different things. But regardless of preferences, understanding the true cost of ownership remained essential. Many young adults entered adulthood without financial education regarding transportation. They learned how to drive but never learned how vehicle financing worked. They understood monthly payments but not interest accumulation. They knew how to sign contracts but not how depreciation affected long-term wealth. Dealerships capitalized on this knowledge gap. Advertising focused heavily on affordability through monthly payments instead of total costs. Terms stretched longer. Down payments shrank. People became comfortable financing expensive vehicles because the monthly number looked manageable. Yet manageable monthly payments often masked enormous total obligations. A vehicle financed over 7 or 8 years created long-term financial commitments that limited flexibility. If income decreased, job loss occurred, or emergencies arose, those fixed expenses became burdensome quickly. Financial resilience required margin. People living paycheck to paycheck with large transportation expenses had little room for unexpected challenges. And life always introduced unexpected challenges eventually. Medical emergencies, job layoffs, economic downturns, family crises, unexpected repairs. The individuals who weathered those situations most effectively were often the ones who avoided overcommitting financially during good times. Transportation choices played a huge role in that stability. Even modest savings compounded significantly over time. Suppose someone reduced transportation expenses by $400 monthly through smarter decisions. That equaled nearly $5,000 annually. Invested consistently over decades, those savings could transform someone's financial future. The impact extended beyond numbers. Lower expenses created freedom. Freedom to change careers. Freedom to take entrepreneurial risks. Freedom to work less. Freedom to handle emergencies without panic. Freedom to retire earlier. High recurring expenses reduced options. Many people felt trapped in jobs they disliked because financial obligations demanded constant income. Expensive lifestyles created dependency. The irony was that many purchases marketed as symbols of freedom actually reduced freedom. Luxury vehicles were a perfect example. A person might feel successful driving an expensive car, but if the payment required staying in a stressful job indefinitely, was that really freedom? Meanwhile, someone driving a modest vehicle with strong investments and low expenses possessed far greater flexibility. Real wealth often looked boring. It looked like consistency, patience, discipline, intentional decisions repeated over long periods. Most wealth was not built through flashy purchases. It was built through delayed gratification and strategic allocation of resources. This did not mean people should never enjoy their money. Experiences mattered. Comfort mattered. Quality of life mattered. But financial decisions should align with long-term priorities instead of short-term validation. Transportation represented one of the clearest examples of this principle because the costs were so large and recurring. Even people who considered themselves financially responsible sometimes overlooked the cumulative impact. A slightly more expensive vehicle here, a slightly longer commute there, higher insurance premiums, frequent upgrades. Small decisions compounded into major financial outcomes. Awareness changed behavior. Once people truly understood how much transportation affected their financial lives, many began making different choices. Some downsized vehicles. Some refinanced loans. Some moved closer to work. Some learned basic maintenance. Some delayed upgrades. Some embraced used cars proudly instead of apologetically. And many discovered something surprising. Very few people actually cared what they drove as much as they initially feared. Most strangers barely noticed. The pressure existed largely in their own minds. People were too busy worrying about their own lives to spend significant time judging someone else's car. That realization felt liberating. Suddenly, practical decisions became easier. Driving an older, reliable vehicle no longer felt embarrassing. It felt intelligent. There was also an important distinction between assets and liabilities. Assets generally put money into someone's pocket. Liabilities generally took money out. Most cars were liabilities. Again, that did not mean they lacked usefulness. Transportation could be necessary and valuable. But confusing liabilities with investments created financial problems. Some people justified expensive vehicle purchases by calling them investments, even though the cars consistently lost value. True investments typically generated returns, appreciation, or income. Cars usually generated expenses. Understanding that distinction helped people make clearer decisions. Another hidden issue involved emotional spending after income increases. Whenever someone received a promotion or salary raise, dealerships suddenly became more tempting. Salespeople understood this psychology perfectly. People wanted visible evidence of progress. A new car provided instant gratification. Investing money quietly into retirement accounts did not create the same emotional excitement. But long-term wealth favored patience over immediate rewards. Financially successful individuals often celebrated income increases by increasing investments rather than expenses. They resisted the urge to inflate lifestyles too quickly. Transportation remained one of the easiest areas to control because practical alternatives existed. Reliable used cars could provide nearly identical functionality for far lower cost. Many dependable models lasted well over 200,000 miles with proper maintenance. Yet consumers frequently prioritized luxury features over financial efficiency. Leather seats, premium sound systems, large rims, advanced trim packages, brand prestige. All these additions increased costs dramatically while providing relatively minor practical benefits. Manufacturers understood consumer psychology extremely well. They sold aspiration. People rarely bought transportation alone. They bought the feeling associated with it. Confidence, admiration, belonging, status. The challenge was recognizing when emotions were driving financial decisions. Financial maturity often involved separating wants from needs. A reliable car that safely transported someone from one place to another fulfilled the core purpose. Everything beyond that became optional. Optional spending was not automatically wrong, but it should be conscious. Too many people unconsciously sacrificed future freedom for temporary appearances. The math behind transportation costs became even more dramatic when considering investing. Suppose someone invested $800 monthly instead of spending it on excessive transportation costs. With decades of compound growth, that money could potentially become enormous. Compound interest rewarded consistency and time. The earlier someone began investing, the more powerful the effect became. Young adults especially benefited from controlling transportation expenses because those savings had the longest possible time horizon to grow. A 25-year-old making disciplined financial choices could dramatically alter their future compared to someone living beyond their means. Unfortunately, society rarely celebrated financial restraint. No one congratulated someone for maxing out retirement contributions. No strangers admired emergency funds. Nobody stopped to compliment low debt levels. Visible consumption attracted attention. Invisible wealth did not. But invisible wealth created real security. Many people eventually reached moments of clarity. Perhaps they calculated how much they had spent on cars over 10 years. Perhaps rising interest rates made financing unbearable. Perhaps economic uncertainty forced reevaluation. Perhaps they simply became tired of trading so much income for temporary satisfaction. Whatever triggered the realization, the conclusion often remained similar. Transportation expenses mattered far more than most people realized. That awareness changed priorities. Suddenly, practical decisions no longer felt like sacrifices. They felt empowering. Driving a paid-off car felt better than making endless payments. Lower expenses reduced stress. Savings grew faster. Investments compounded. Financial confidence increased. The focus shifted from looking wealthy to becoming wealthy. That distinction transformed lives. Many people discovered that financial peace brought more satisfaction than luxury purchases ever could. Owning fewer liabilities created breathing room, and breathing room created opportunity. The ultimate lesson was not necessarily that everyone should avoid cars entirely or drive the cheapest possible vehicle forever. The deeper lesson involved intentionality. Every major financial decision carried long-term consequences. Transportation was simply one of the most underestimated examples. People who understood the numbers gained an advantage. They recognized that recurring expenses mattered enormously. They realized status often came at hidden costs. They understood that wealth building required balancing enjoyment today with security tomorrow. Most importantly, they stopped making financial decisions purely to impress other people. Because at the end of the day, The neighbors admiring someone's expensive car were not helping make the payments. The coworkers complimenting luxury vehicles were not funding retirement accounts. The strangers noticing a fancy badge on the front grille were not contributing toward financial independence. External validation faded quickly, but smart financial decisions compounded for decades. And in a world where so many people silently struggled under the weight of debt and rising expenses, understanding the true cost of transportation could become one of the most valuable financial realizations a person ever had. The wealthiest-looking person in the parking lot was not always the wealthiest person financially. Sometimes the truly wealthy individual was the one driving the older car quietly home while their investments continued growing in the background. That person understood something many others did not. Real wealth was not about appearances. It was about ownership. Ownership of time. Ownership of choices. Ownership of financial freedom. And for millions of people, mastering transportation expenses became one of the first and most important steps toward achieving it.